What's up, everybody? Rob Ferretti here. Welcome to the series where I am representing myself as my own attorney, which is a pro se litigant in a federal litigation against the government. Just want to point out, just in case you're new to this, I am not an attorney. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a planner, not an architect. I am interpreting things that I see. I'm doing my own research. I'm looking at case law. Anything that you see in this video should be treated for entertainment purposes only. I do have to make it watchable, so I do trim some stuff down. It is not my intent to manipulate or misrepresent any material facts in this matter. That being said, enjoy the show. What's up, everybody? Rob Ferretti, and if you're just tuning in, we're on episode 2 of me being in a federal litigation and superior court litigation against my town for discrimination. Right, so this is 3 years ongoing. Welcome back to the party. And here is just a little bit of a preview as to where I am in the irrationality that I'm dealing with. This is an audio recording from the mayor and council not more than 2 months ago.
I should or should not say anything is typically the insurance company puts money in reserve to have that kind of conversation if they feel that that's what they should be doing. They are not putting any money in reserve.
They're not even throwing out a nuisance number.
Right. So they are not feeling that this is something that they should be doing.
Yeah, we're not in JIF, but what JIF typically does, JIF is a joint insurance fund that they carry for many, many towns. They'll throw in a number because of the cost of the litigation. Just to mitigate the legal expenses. They think it might cost $100,000 to litigate the case. They'll throw out $50,000. See if it's taken.
They're not doing that.
Yeah, it's not even.
But we don't have JIF.
I understand that, but Marilyn, I'm just talking about the process.
They're not even putting, according to Ken and his conversations with them, they're not even putting any money in reserve to have any of those conversations with the plaintiff.
That's my understanding.
My concern is, I noticed that things changing, and he did bring up, but you know what I mean? Like, that's concerning to me. Like, can he prove, like it or not, could he prove some type of bias? I don't know,
He's trying to say there was bias, that there was
But now we're getting into...
Yeah, I wouldn't, let's not.
getting into... You know what I'm saying? Like, I just...
And the tape is still running.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because he is me, too.
Let's not talk about this anymore.
I don't want to talk.
Yeah.
Now, the mayor and council is not directly involved with the litigation, to my knowledge, and they are receiving information from a third party. I can only guess who that is. However, they are being relayed the information that my lawsuit that has now been going on for 3 years is so frivolous, right? So frivolous. Frivolous lawsuits like somebody suing you because there's a zombie in your tree. Something that's it's laughable, it gets tossed out at nothing. It's so frivolous that the insurance company that represents the town hasn't even set a reserve. And what an insurance company will do when a litigation opens up, they look at their possible exposure, they look through their wheel of the future, which it always works out that way, and they're like, all right, this is where we're going to set the reserve just so their books are accurate and they're not going to be over leveraged if all these lawsuits hit at the same time and they're out of cash, stuff like that. So their position is that the insurance company in this matter thinks this litigation is so frivolous that they didn't even set a reserve. Nothing to worry about. We got this. However, we're 3 years in, right? And if it's so frivolous, dare I ask anyone with a brain why my town is choosing to pay for a second attorney to also defend the litigation? If it's that frivolous, any crackerjack lawyer can take care of it, right? Like, you don't have to worry about anything. Like this is going to get knocked down in the wind. This guy doesn't stand a chance. The claims are so frivolous. Well, at the end of this, somebody's either going to get fired or somebody is misrepresenting the actual position of certain parties and the position of the borough in this matter. And that is what I'm about to set out to prove. But before we do that, I'm going to have to explain to you guys everything. And when I say everything, I have to tell you what ordinances are, what variances are, what the municipal land use law is, what New Jersey Administrative Code is, what the NJSA is. So there's all this stuff that we're going to cover, and we're going to do that right now. So what are ordinances? What are variances? What is the procedure to build something when you buy a piece of property and you want to develop it? I'm going to focus on the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law the New Jersey Administrative Code, and then the New Jersey Statutory Authority. Those are the governing factors that we're going to be focusing on. So the NJSA has the subsection of the municipal land use law, and that's what gives local municipalities the ability and the framework to create their local zoning laws, which in turn are enforced by the local government, and then if challenged, go to the Superior Court. The New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law sets guidelines as to how the local government is going to be formed, and it's created into 3 boards, and you're allowed to have a historic district if it applies. My town has a historic district. The 3 governmental boards that we have are a governing body, the planning board, and the zoning board of adjustment, which each have distinct but interrelated powers over how zoning ordinances are created, interpreted, and applied. The governing body in my town is the mayor and council. Their role in the development process is to adopt and amend zoning ordinances and to appoint members to the planning and zoning board. The planning board's role is to prepare and adopt the master plan, review and recommend changes to zoning ordinances for consistency to the master plan to the governing body, and to review and approve site plans and subdivisions that do not require variance relief. The Zoning Board of Adjustment's job is to grant use and bulk variances and to hear appeals from the zoning officer's decision. If a municipality like mine has less than 5,000 residents, you can combine the Zoning Board of Adjustment and the Planning Board and make one collective board, which is what we have. We have a mayor and council as our governing body, and then we have a zoning and planning board, which is just the zoning board or the planning board of the borough of Rockledge. The historic district is governed by a historical review board, and they are an advisory board whose purpose is to review applications for historical accuracy and conformity in the historic zone and to prove whether or not a structure is of historical significance or not, and it is allowed to be taken down, replaced, or preserved. The way the planning board is set up is they're required by law to have a chairman, a vice chairman, a secretary, and an administrative officer. It is pretty standard that most zoning and planning boards will hire a planning board specific attorney and then an engineer and planner. Typically, the engineer will be a licensed planner and serve both roles. The planning board attorney's job is to provide legal counsel, drafting of resolutions, advising on municipal land use law compliance such as posting of notice and procedural aspects of the board's operations. The planner's job is to advise on the master plan, zoning consistency, and planning testimony. Whereas the engineer's job is to review site plans, interpret ordinances, subdivisions, stormwater management, grading, and other engineering elements. In our situation, as I said, we have an engineer who is also a licensed planner, so he takes care of both of those elements as one human. Now, the master plan is something that had to be adopted. Our last master plan was done in 1991, I believe. The master plan is a long-range comprehensive policy document that guides the municipality's land use, development, and preservation decisions. It's the foundation upon which the zoning ordinances, subdivision regulations, and other land use policies are built. The NJSA requires that the master plan has a re-examination every 10 years for consistency and updates, and generally most municipalities will just completely redraft their master plan every 10 to 20 years. Our master plan effectively says the 2 main focuses are on the preservation and enhancement of the borough's character through maintaining a 2-acre lot size and 5-acre industrial lot size, and to preserve and enhance the historic districts. Those are the 2 focuses that our master plan uses as sort of our guiding light. In New Jersey, the zoning ordinances are local laws adopted by the municipality's governing body under the authority of the municipal land use law to regulate how land within the municipality can be used and developed. They're the primary legal tool for implementing the policies and objectives of the master plan. The governing body adopts ordinances which must be substantially consistent with the goals of the master plan, as the master plan changes over time to adapt to the ordinances, or the ordinances adopt to the master plan if there's changes to the master plan. They sort of work hand in hand. The purposes of the ordinances, as listed in the NJSA, are to promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare, provide adequate light, air, and open space, prevent overcrowding, conserve natural resources and historic sites, regulate population density and the intensity of land use, and facilitate appropriate development consistent with the master plan. Zoning ordinances typically consist of a zoning map that divides up the municipality into zoning districts. It lists use regulations, bulk regulations like minimum lot size, lot coverage limits, setbacks, building height limits, and floor area ratio. It lists supplemental regulations like parking requirements, signage rules, landscape buffering, environmental protection standards, etc. and procedures for variances and site plan approvals. Let's look at the different zones my town has set up. We've got 5 different districts. Each zone has different zoning, setback, and density requirements, which is why it's divided up like this. We have the A zone, which is the residential zone, which is what we're going to be focusing on. We have the B zone, which is where the wedding hall is. We have the T zone, which is for transitioning from residential into where the wedding hall is. We have the C zone, which is commercial. Then we have the P zone, which is all public land, which is the municipal building. And then the rest of it is all golf courses and wooded area for trees and hiking trails. But for the purposes of this, we're only going to focus on the A zone regulations because that's what impacts my development. The application of the ordinances and variances being granted by boards is regulated by 2 main sources: the Municipal Land Use Law and the NJSA, which establish the procedural and substantive requirements for planning and zoning boards. The NJSA also has the Local Government Ethics Law, which governs the conduct of local officials, including planning boards and zoning board members. Together, they set both process and conduct standards to ensure fairness, avoid conflicts of interest, and ensure that boards apply ordinances uniformly. Now, if you can't conform to the ordinances, you don't have the ability to fit into the mold and advance the master plan's objectives, that is where variance relief comes in. Variances are like safety valves, which allow for relief from the strict application of zoning ordinances in individual cases. It's an expansion of whatever ordinance you fail to comply with: coverage, lot size, height, setbacks, whatever. New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law Statute NJSA 4055D-70 authorizes a planning board to grant relief from the strict application of a zoning ordinance. To receive any variance relief, you have to satisfy both the positive and negative criteria. The positive criteria is why the variance should be granted. The negative criteria is why granting the variance relief won't harm the public or the zoning plan. There are 3 types of variances, as I said in the previous video. The first is the C1 variance, which is the hardship variance. The positive criteria is the strict application of the ordinance causes practical difficulties or undue hardship because of the unique property conditions. It allows you to deviate from bulk standards because of specific topographical stuff having to do with the property. So increasing your setbacks because of the shape of the property or the width or the narrowness or the extreme topographical conditions like extreme slope, a lot of rock on the property or something like that. You're on a mountainside or you have wetlands. Anything that constrains how you can use that property is what would justify a hardship variance. And this allows for you to apply for a variance to increase or decrease setbacks, height, location, coverage amounts, just because you're restricted as to how you're able to use the property. The next is the C2 or flexible C variance. That's generally something that just has to advance the purposes of zoning. You have to prove that the benefits outweigh the detriments. And now there are, I think, 14 or 15 different purposes of zoning in the municipal land use law. You only have to identify one. You only have to satisfy one, let's put it that way. So it could be creating and this is a pretty common one, creating a desirable visual environment. Just making the place look better. And that is accepted as a positive criteria to grant a C2 variance. I think I've done that every time I've put an application in. I've made something, I've taken a 100-year-old structure and put up a nice new one. And the fact that I built my house and it looks significantly better than what was here proves that. But I was also granted approval for the house. But now we're just focusing on the garage. The negative criteria is that also it does not harm the public or the zoning plan. And the last variance is a D variance, which is looking to change the use of the property in the zone to something that is otherwise not permitted, say multifamily, or changing it to a school or a 7-Eleven, or however wild you want to go with it. But doing something that otherwise wouldn't be permitted by ordinance, that is a D variance, where you're not just going from a single-family residential to another single-family residential. Those would be bulk variances. This would be a variance where you're looking to change the use of the property. The positive criteria, you have to prove that the proposed use inherently serves the public good. that the site is particularly well suited for the proposed use, and that relief would advance the specific purposes of zoning. There's an advanced negative criteria on this one. The applicant must show that the variance can be granted without causing substantial detriment to the public good and without substantially impairing the intent and purpose of the zoning plan. I'm not looking for a D variance, so it doesn't really matter, but D variances have been granted to other properties in my town, but for me, I'm not looking for that. The burden of proof is on the applicant for all variance relief, and the proofs must be provided on the record for any of these variances to be granted. It can't be presumed, it can't be assumed, they can't say, yeah, we get it. You have to provide testimony, you have to provide both the positive and negative criteria to get any variance approved in the state of New Jersey. Also, these are the specific things that the board should be looking at. These are the specific criteria that the board should be looking at when weighing whether or not to approve or disapprove an application. They should be just seeing if the positive criteria are met and the negative criteria are met, or the hardship is established. That is what they should be basing their decisions on. At the conclusion, after you're approved or denied, if somebody does not get their way or they do not like the outcome, they can do what's called a prerogative writ lawsuit. And after the decision is made by the board, they've got 45 days in which to publish the decision in the form of a resolution. That resolution is memorialized, signed off by the planning board, published in a publication. At that time, the clock starts. Either party, either the prevailing party or the aggrieved party, has the ability to go to the Superior Court and say, I would like you to revisit this, and there's only two reasons you can get something sort of overturned. That the decision, because obviously the Superior Court does not want to be deciding what size house should be put in different places. Either that the decision by the planning board was like procedurally wrong, they did something incorrectly or illegally, or that the decision was arbitrary and capricious. That means whether it was for or against an applicant, that it was not with sound basis, or there was a reason that shouldn't have been used, whether it's, in my case, discrimination, or they didn't like me, or they didn't like my profession, they don't like I make YouTube videos. Whatever it is, that can't be used. That makes the decision now arbitrary because it's not based on advancing the zoning plan and the positive and negative criteria that have to be provided. After that 45 days is up, if nothing is challenged, that's on the books. That decision is final. If the decision is challenged, then at the end of the decision of the Superior Court is when that is effectively memorialized, and that is then a final decision as well. So whatever the outcome of the Superior Court, whether they send it back to the planning board and say, we disagree with you, you've done something wrong, that was an arbitrary decision, they will make you go back, rememorialize it, and then that is a final decision in the favor of the applicant if it was denied, or in the favor of objectors if it was wrongfully approved. Once you have the final decision, then the borough or the town or the city can issue you building permits. Those building permits are then good for 2 years roughly, and you have 2 years in which to start your construction. I think you get automatic approvals for a year or two if you need extensions or choose to have extensions or choose not to do it. After that 2 years, if you don't file for an extension, your approval's gone. It's expired. You have to go make a new application and go through the entire process over again, which is why it's smart to start building within your 1 or 2 years. And even if you don't start building within the 1 or 2 years, going and continually getting your extensions so you can keep that resolution of approval valid until you're ready to build. Now, after you've completed your construction, you have to get an as-built survey done. That's having the engineers come out and confirm that everything you were approved for you've done, and you haven't done anything you weren't supposed to do. If it turns out that you did build something you weren't supposed to build, then you'd have to go back to the planning board, and they'll have to either approve it as is, or they will deny it, and you're going to go have to correct whatever you did. Those are the two options. Now you've gotten an approval, started the construction, completed the construction, confirmed what was approved was done, and that now sets a baseline for any future development. Now, I've heard this 100 times from my town, but every application stands on its own merits. It rises and falls on its own merits. So as long as you provide the proof sufficient to approve your application, you can get it approved. Which is the whole reason I'm here and why I'm highlighting that we have the most restrictive coverage ordinance in the country and why it's a problem. We're not the only historic district in New Jersey or the US, so it's not like this 5% coverage is protecting any historical aspects of the town or advancing zoning in any way, shape, or form. It just allows for the planning board to have unreasonable control and require more people than not to have to get variances to do any sort of reasonable development. The New Jersey Supreme Court has already decided that too many variance applications indicate defective zoning ordinances. In the case of Harrington Glen, 52 New Jersey 22 of 1968, quote, "The variance power is to be exercised sparingly and only when an exceptional case for relief is clearly made out. It was never intended that the variance procedure should be a substitute for a revision of the zoning ordinance. The necessity for a variance in the great majority of cases is indicative that the ordinance itself may be unreasonable. The fact that we require so many people to get variances to do any sort of construction on their property supports my case that the variance is not lawful and it should be revised and should have been revised a long time ago. This is not the first time somebody has brought up that this 5% coverage ordinance is too restrictive, and the planning board has always just chose to ignore it and say, let's just keep it the way it is. At the end of every year, the planning board has to do a variance review of all the approvals that were granted and then all the variances that were granted. And they always try to come up with some justification, be it trying to minimize the coverage asked for or whatever their justification is, to not then change and see historically that more than not, you need to do a variance to get any sort of approval in this town. The fact that we require so many people to get variances supports my assertion that the ordinances themselves need to be replaced. Municipalities are able to liberally create ordinances in their favor, but zoning ordinances need a basis to justify validity and purpose. Otherwise, they can be challenged. They have to support the objectives of the master plan, and they have to be applied consistently. The fact that so many people need to get variances versus not supports my contention that it's time for a change. Now, for the federal litigation, we'll focus on that first. Here's what I have to prove. I'm making an equal protection claim with the class of one theory. I'm not claiming to be a member of a protected class, like a race, gender, whatever, but instead that the government intentionally treated me differently from others who are similarly situated and that there was no rational basis for them to do so. I'm going to prove that there was universal non-compliance, that the ordinance in question is being violated across the board and that other properties in the jurisdiction also exceed the same limits, and that the government is aware of the other approvals and the relief granted to other properties. They're just not extending it to me. Despite widespread violations, only my property is being targeted for enforcement or denied relief. And finally, that there's no rational or legitimate governmental reason for treating me differently, particularly that everyone else has been granted variances or no action's been taken for people that have constructed stuff that exceed what I'm being denied for. Now, here's why I say I'm being discriminated against. 100% of lots underneath 1 acre in size are non-conforming, 100%. There's not one that is not. Then on top of that, every single lot that's under an acre has also been granted or has more lot coverage than I keep getting denied for. I'm the only person in the entire town, regardless of lot size, that has been denied for 11% or 11.6% or 11.8%. Everybody else has been approved for that, for the total structure coverage allowance. I'm the only person in the last 25 years that I've looked that has not received his resolution within the mandatory 45 days that the municipal land use law requires. And on top of that, that's 2 of my applications. The borough has stalled my applications by constantly deeming my application incomplete for things that were not matters of completeness on other applications. They also denied my first application for reasons that they didn't discuss in public or vote on in public. So there was a second separate basis of denial having to do with commercial activity that they did not vote on. They just stuffed it in the resolution, signed it, and then sent it out. That's also a problem. Decisions have to be made in public, and there has to be input from both the public and or the parties involved. Also, they passed an ordinance specifically targeted at preventing me from being able to come back and apply for a barn by restricting barns to 2-acre properties or greater. That was done at the same meeting 5 minutes after we walked out of the room. That was the first thing that they discussed, was passing the barn ordinance and changing it after they voted me down so I couldn't come back in with a barn. They also consistently changed the definition of 3-car garage. There's been people approved for 3-car garages up to 1,500, 1,800, 2,000 square feet. When I come in proposing anything, it's like, well, it's a 6-car garage, it's a 12-car garage. They only look at my application as to the actual capacity and what they could possibly squeeze in there, and they'll approve anyone else and just call it a 3-car garage. Oh, you're putting in for a 4-car garage? All right, well, you're not allowed to have a 4-car garage. They just change it to a 3-car garage. They don't change anything. The dimensions are the same. Everything's the same. They just write 3-car garage instead of 4-car garage, and they're like, all right, good. To me, it's like, well, yeah, if it doesn't have to be any more than 20 feet deep and 30 feet wide, and that's it. That's all we're willing to give you, and that's not fair. You can't give other people a structure twice or 3 times the size of what I'm proposing, call that a 3-car garage, and tell me mine is an oversized 3-car garage at a third of the size. I'm going to show the difference between the proofs required of others to approve variances at greater extents versus the proofs that are required of me for lesser variances. I'm going to show what was considered hardship for other people, but then not considered a hardship in my situation. The borough is aware of the errors of not getting as-built surveys or confirming what was constructed on other properties. They've been aware of this for a long time. They've taken 0 corrective action to try to resolve this and to make a clean, accurate, factual record. When they're aware of a problem, they have to fix it. They can't just be like, whatever, that was yesterday, and move on. Now that I've covered where I feel I've been treated unfairly, here's how I'm going to prove it. I'm going to establish how everyone else has been treated, what they've been granted, under what context they've been granted it, under what definitions, under what treatment they've been given, and then compare it to how I have been treated. The process to getting your plans looked at and approved, every application has to get reviewed once submitted by the planning board attorney, by the planning board engineer and planner, who is collectively one person in our situation, and by the historical consultant. That all becomes the starting record for every application. Each professional provides a review letter weighing in their thoughts and opinions on their specific aspects that they're looking at on each application. Those letters are part of public record. The application is part of public record. The surveys, the plans, that's all the file that makes up what the board is going to make the determination on. Once the board makes their determination, everything that happened in the record, the testimony that was provided, the proofs that were provided, the facts that they found, and then the justifications for approving or denying a application gets memorialized in that resolution. Those resolutions are all public record. Now, individually, you may miss something. When I take the entirety of what's been approved in my 74 property town and line it up next to each other, you're going to see some glaring inconsistencies and a lot of stuff that was done very, very wrong. Here are some of the workarounds that the planning board has used to get around the granting of variances or the magnitude of variances that people were required to ask for. My favorite is the definition of structure. Now, we have a thing that has the driveway. You're allowed a driveway up to 15 feet in width. Anything outside of 15 feet in width is considered structure. It goes in your total impervious coverage calculation. However, when people wanted to get around that, they said, well, it's a gravel driveway, so only some of it counts. Actually, none of it counts because it's a gravel driveway. And they've treated structure differently. It's either a driveway or it's not, right? And if it's a driveway in excess of 15 feet, coverage. That's how it is for me. But they've treated several other applications where like, well, we didn't have to do that because it's a gravel driveway. So like this part's a driveway, but as soon as you get there, that's just decorative rock garden or something. Whatever they used. Even I've confirmed it with the planning board engineer himself, that was done incorrectly, and the lot coverage for several lots is significantly understated because of that exclusion, which the first time I saw that come up was on one application where they said the driveway had to count, driveway had to count. All of a sudden, the planning board attorney, who, believe it or not, shouldn't even be weighing in, he's not an engineer, should not be giving any engineering commentary, is giving his thoughts on engineering and saying, I don't think that should count. Next thing you know, for a couple of applications, anyone in the good old boys club for the 5 or 10 years was able to sneak away with this exclusion and have non-permitted coverage not count as structure to keep their lot coverage lesser. That's a problem. They've done the same thing with like retaining walls. I put a little 2-foot wall up in front of my house, structure. Like, well, if you made it dry laid stone, then it's not structure. And I'm like, where in the definitions, it defines walls. It doesn't say if it's made of dry laid stone. it doesn't count. But you've allowed people to put up stone walls and just say, like, yeah, just make a dry laid stone and it won't count. It's either a wall or it's not a wall. You can't just say everything is decorative gravel. You can't say if I made my house out of gravel, then it doesn't count as a house. It's still a house. You're defining a structure as a driveway, as a wall, as a swimming pool, as a patio, whatever it is, regardless of what it's made for, it's either impervious or it's not. The planning board's also not required some people to count structure coverage when they're like, okay, we'll approve you for a covered structure. Great, 1 covered porch, please. Didn't say how big it could be. Usually when you approve something, you have to say, I'm approving you for a 10-foot by 10-foot covered porch. Because covered structures are considered part of the main structure first off, but they're also considered lot coverage. So to just approve somebody for a covered porch without saying how big it could be, 0 testimony. Not even, it's just, here's the whole thing. Here's the entire testimony.
Historic review and approval of both variances for construction of proposed overhang on the existing patio.
Correct. Yes, sir. I just would like a yay or nay. What do you want me to say? We've heard enough testimony tonight.
I'd like to make a motion to approve this application.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed? No.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. So I spend 15 planning board meetings and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and other people just walk right through. Forget about it. Here's my favorite one, using the right-of-way to increase your lot size. This is the most counterintuitive thing. We have a 5% coverage ordinance, 4.5%, to try to minimize the amount of structure on a property and try to increase the amount of air, light, and open space to make everything feel more airy. Here, they're allowing you to use the right-of-way to increase your lot size, to therefore increase the amount of allowable structure you have, to reduce the ratio. So now you have more structure on less visible property. And that goes against everything in the master plan, that goes against everything for having the most restrictive zoning ordinance in the country for as far as coverage goes. To allow for that to happen is mind-numbing. And then the fact that you're like, well, what about the impervious surface of the street? Well, if you're including it in the lot size, you got to count the impervious surface of the structure, whatever's on the ground. Nah, that doesn't count. Doesn't count. Why would it not count? Is it not impervious? Is it not part of the lot? Either you use it or you don't use it. You can't double dip and use both. You're just making your lot bigger. And then when you're making your lot bigger, you're not counting the additional coverage, which throws everything off. Because I asked the planning board engineer, I'm like, look, everybody's been doing this, or not everybody, but I've seen this done. Can I do it? And he's like, it doesn't make any sense because you have to count the street as structure coverage. So you're adding 100% coverage to make your lot bigger. It's counterintuitive because your percentages go up. The town has also allowed people to use illegal coverages as a starting point to then justify increasing their variance or granting variance relief where otherwise it probably wouldn't have been permitted. And they're allowing illegal structure coverage of like, well, that was there before you, or even illegal structure coverage that somebody did on their own property as a justification for granting a variance. That is not, an illegal condition cannot be used as a starting point. That's the whole point of me explaining all the zoning procedures earlier on. An illegal condition, unless it was something that was legal before the ordinances changed, is not grandfathered into anything. You can't grandfather something that was illegally created, whether you did it, whether somebody else did it. I can't buy a residential house with a gas station on it and say I want to keep the gas station because it was there. It was never permitted to be there. It's got to come down. Do your research, buy your property, but you can't grant somebody and you can't use that as a basis of approval that somebody had an illegal condition that they didn't create or they did create, but they're correcting it. So therefore that's the positive criteria and we're going to approve this guy. And then the borough not requiring as-built surveys to complete all the construction projects. So now everybody who's done this, the as-built surveys would have shown that people didn't take down structures they were supposed to take down. When you're getting approved, you're like, all right, I'm going to get rid of this thing and then put up this thing, and that's going to offset, so I'm not going to need a variance. But when then they don't get rid of the structures, now their coverage is higher than they stated it was going to be and higher than what they were approved for. Or they're building structures bigger than they were supposed to or stuff that they weren't supposed to. And then the board takes no actions. They just give them the CO anyway. You can't, that's absolutely absurd. You're not finishing the most important part after the approval, is confirming that what is approved is actually done so that you can use that as a baseline for future development. That goes against everything that we stand for with the master plan. Here's another one, the approval of barns up to 10%. If our goal is to minimize the coverage, we've been given willy-nilly, you want a barn 10%. You're taking a property that's now allowed to have 5% and giving them 15%, just like that, letting them put a giant structure up there. And that doesn't advance the purposes of our zoning or master plan at all. You're allowing more coverage with no real justification other than somebody saying, yeah, I'm going to store a tractor in it, or I'm going to have a tomato garden next to it. Like, that is not a justification for granting a barn. A barn, if anything, that's more than double the size of all the other total lot coverage should require, at the very least, that's where the variance should come in, not like that's granted in the ordinances. That's been used as a workaround for so many people to have garages that are barns, pool houses that are barns, swimming pools indoors that are barns. Those are all to not require them to get lot coverage variances, but still give these people these nice luxury structures that they expect if you know somebody in this like wealthy town. Probably the most maddening one, I've already brought it up, is allowing people to get variance relief as if it's just handing them out like Tic Tacs. Like, yeah, whatever, thanks for coming in. And not requiring proofs. Proofs are required by the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law. You have to prove the positive and negative criteria to grant any variance relief. If they give zero testimony, you can't give them a variance. That's why this is so silly. We have this law to require everybody to go through the gauntlet and let them just pick and choose who they want to give what to, but they're not doing it legally. They're doing it in a way that's just like, yeah, whatever, we don't need variance relief from that guy, or we don't need proofs from that guy. You're approved, yeah, that positive, negative criteria, we got it, we'll just put it in the resolution. And then effectively what they do is they write fictional resolutions that say they've satisfied the positive and negative criteria when there was no testimony to support that. So yes, next video, I'm going to get into how specific properties were treated differently, create the basis as to what exists in the town, what has been approved, how it's been wrongfully approved in the town, and then I will get into my applications as to what wasn't approved. So I'm going to set the baseline as to what's approved and what was done incorrectly, and what proofs are required of people, what favors and arbitrary actions were granted to people without justification. And then we'll get into everything that they've done to me. I'm telling you, you're going to have to buckle up for what they've done to me, because it's been absolutely egregious and very maddening, but it's going to be entertaining for you guys. The only thing that this is one of the reasons I'm happy I'm doing this series, corruption only exists in the shadows, right? Because nobody sees it. So once it's out in the light, it's got to be addressed. That's why I'm doing it, and hopefully we'll get some change. It's not going to be the most comfortable thing for the town to have to go through all this, but we're going to get the change that we need to make it a better place and run properly. And hopefully the people that are accountable for a lot of these actions are held accountable. And New Jersey State Attorney General, you've got that open corruption case that I haven't heard back from you on. So, detective, we met. Hit me up, and we'll keep this going. Rob Ferretti, see you next week. New video coming then.